Geographical position, size, borders, natural resources. The People's Socialist Republic of Albania extends over an area of 28,748 square kilometers. It lies on the western side of the Balkan Peninsula and along the coastline of the Adriatic and Ionian Seas. To the north and northeast, Albania is bounded by Yugoslavia, and to the south and southeast by Greece. Relief. Albania is mainly a mountainous country in which 76.6% of its territory is mountains and hills over 200 meters above sea level, while the true plains under 200 meters above sea level occupy only 23.4%. The average altitude of Albania, 708 m, is about twice that of Europe. The mountains are not very high, in the region of 2000 m. And their maximum height does not exceed 2751 m. The hills lie mainly on the western part of the territory. Most of them are not higher than 400 m. The plains below 200 meters above sea level are also in the western part of Albania. However, there are some plains in the interior of the country, either in the form valleys, the plains of Elbasan and Dropoli, or in the form of depressions formed during the Quaternary period, the Korga Plain. On the basis of the geological features of the territory and the structure of the relief, we distinguish four well-characterized natural regions, namely the Alps of Albania, the Central Mountain region, the Southern Mountain region and the Western Lowlands. The Albanian Alps, situated north of the Drina River, present the smallest natural unit, but also the most rugged mountain region of the territory because of their tectonic and geological structure, as well as of the intensive action of external forces. Most of the Alps exceed 2,000 meters above sea level, the highest peak being that of Jezerksa, 2,693 m. There is a striking contrast between the mountains in the form of pyramids and the deep valleys between them, which have the form of narrow gorges or deep hollows, the Thetha Gorge, the Boga Hollow and so on. Now, motor roads have been opened along the principal valleys leading to the heart of the Alps. From the point of view of nature, the Alps make up an important scenic region with typical alpine landscapes. Tall forests and alpine pasture lands make up the principal surface resources of this region. The Central Mountain region, which lies between the Drina Valley in the north and the Central Devil and the Lower Osum valleys in the south, is quite different. The forms of its relief are less rugged, not only because of the prevalence of magmatic formations, but also because of the less intensive action of external forces. Like the Alps, the mountains of the Central Mountain region are also covered with dense forests, but because of some wider valleys, agriculture is of greater importance here than in the Alpine region. The Central Mountain region is characterized by its great underground riches with minerals like chromium, iron, nickel, and copper. The Central Mountain region is rich in big lakes of tectonic origin, the Ari and Prespa lakes, and in smaller glacial lakes, the Lura, Martineschi and other lakes, as well as in flowing waters which impart special beauty to this region. The Southern Mountain region, lying south of the Central Mountain region, presents a more regular tectonic form, which is characterized by an alternation of limestone mountain ranges and valleys of chalky sandstones and shales. Most of the ranges rise 2,000 m above sea level, with some of them nearly 2,500 m high, the Pipangu summit 2,495 meters, but there are also valleys below sea level, the Delvina Basin. Towards the west, the ranges of mountains of the Southern Mountain region run right down to the Ionian coast, along which lies the Albanian Riviera with its mild Mediterranean climate and landscape. The arable land is concentrated in valleys and on the hillsides, terracing of the land being more typical here than in the other part of the territory. In the western part of the territory, along the Adriatic Sea coast, lie the western lowlands, the only true lowland plains. This area extends over a distance of 200 kilometers from north to south and eastward up to 50 kilometers into the interior of the country. It is characterized by little slope. For this reason the subsoil waters are near the surface and the rivers meander widely along shallow courses. Along the seaboard there are many lagoons, strips of sand and dunes. The sand strips form beaches which extend for kilometers along the coast, where bathing centers, which are frequented more and more by the workers of the country, have been set up, Shenzhen, Durs, Vlora, and Saranda. Before liberation, the lowlands of the Adriatic seaboard were covered with marshes and swamps, and little used for cultivation. But, with the establishment of the people's state power and thanks to big land improvement projects and the straightening, deepening, and stop banking of river beds, the marshes and swamps have been drained and turned into arable land. On the other hand, the construction of an extensive network of irrigation canals and reservoirs has solved the problem of irrigating the lands under cultivation. The hills which rise in the middle of the western lowlands have been formed by relatively new folding of the Earth's crust. They are covered with Mediterranean shrubs which are increasingly being replaced by vineyards and blocks of olive, citrus and fruit trees systematized in terraces. As a result of the great work done during our people's state power, the western lowland region has become the granary of our country and the most important region for industrial plants like cotton, sunflower, and tobacco. Cattle raising, too, has undergone great development. Not only the rich agricultural resources, but also the mineral ones like petroleum, bitumen, and coal, as well as the favorable geographical position and communications have favored industrial activity here. For these reasons the western lowland region is the most densely populated region in Albania. The climate Albania is situated in the Mediterranean climatic belt. But because of the mountainous character of the territory and, especially, of its many divisions, the climate varies from region to region. It is warmest in the western part of the territory which is mainly under the influence of the warm air masses from the sea. Here the winter is moderate, the temperature rarely falling below zero. The summer is hot and, on some occasions, very hot. The maximum July temperature recorded is 44 degrees C, whereas, in the eastern part of Albania, which is mainly under the influence of the continental air masses, the winter is cold. Negative temperatures in winter are frequent and the minimum recorded is 26 degrees Celsius below zero. The summer is hot in the valleys where the maximum July temperature is up to 35 degrees Celsius. Rainfall in Albania is abundant, 1,300 millimeters a year, but irregularly distributed during the year. In general, summer is a dry season, receiving not more than 2.5 to 14% of the annual rainfall, while 40% falls in winter. Summer droughts are more pronounced towards the southwest. Most of the precipitation is in the form of rain. As a rule, snow falls in the interior of the territory and the mountains. Because of the divisions of the territory, the geographical distribution of rain is unequal. Average annual precipitation is over 2,000 millimeters in the Alps in northern Albania and from 650 to 700 millimeters in the valleys of the interior. Typical of Albania is the small amount of cloud for most of the year, with the sky almost always clear. Hydrography: the territory of Albania is rich in rivers and streams. Because of the irregular rainfall and the very rugged relief, they are torrential with high erosive power and carry large amounts of alluvium. The rivers of Albania constitute an important source of hydroelectric power. During the years of our people's state power they began to be utilized with the building of a number of hydroelectric power plants of different capacities. The most important in this regard is the Drinai River, on which one hydro power plant with a capacity of 250,000 kilowatts has already been built. A higher one, with a capacity of 450,000 kilowatts will soon be completed, and it is planned to build several others in the future. The rivers of the country are of major importance also for irrigation purposes. At present, more than 50% of the land under cultivation is irrigated mainly with the water from rivers and artificial reservoirs. In the territory of Albania there are a number of lakes of varying origin, lakes of glacial origin in the highlands, of which there are many lakes of karst origin in the hills, and there are many of these, too, tectonic lakes, the Shkodra, Arya and Prespa lakes, which are the largest in size and most important for fishing, lakes of the lagoon type in the lowlands, which are large reserves for fishing. The lakes of the highlands and hills are used for irrigation purposes. In addition to these natural lakes, during the years of our people's state power, hundreds of artificial lakes have been built for irrigation and hydroelectric power purposes. Such artificial lakes are those of Ulza, Shkopit, Vaidehes, Jansi, Thana and others. With the building of the Firza hydropower plant, an artificial lake will be formed, which will inundate the old town of Kukës, which has already been replaced with the new town of Kukës. In addition to their economic importance, the lakes of Albania are also important scenic attractions. The sea coast of Albania is 470 kilometers long and, besides navigation and fishing, it is a valuable tourist attraction both for the many beaches that lie along it and for its natural beauty. The natural riches of the land and underground, the variable conditions of the relief, climate, hydrography, and soil of the People's Socialist Republic of Albania account for the variety of its plant and animal life. Thousands of different kinds of plants grow in the territory of Albania, which represent most of the flora of the Balkan Peninsula and, indeed, have links with plants of more distant flora. In general, the flora of the western part of the territory consists mainly of typical Mediterranean shrubs. In the inland regions broadleaf trees such as beeches, together with conifers, predominate. About 3% of the plants in Albania occur only in particular regions. Forests cover nearly 40% of the surface of the territory. This great wealth began to be exploited rationally during the years of our people's state power, and feeds one of the most important branches of the country's industry, the timber and paper industries. The fauna of Albania, also, is rich and varied. It is represented by such wild animals as the hare, fox, lynx, otter, bear, wolf, jackal, wild boar, wild goat, deer, and others, by birds, such as partridge, grouse, eagle, snipe, pheasant, and others, and by water birds such as ducks, geese, pelicans, and others. The many waters of the territory abound in waterfowl. Because of the great geological variability of the territory, there is a wide range of metallic and non-metallic minerals, which are the source of one of the principal branches of the industry of our country and figure among the principal items of our exports. Among them the principal ones are the reserves of oil, natural gas, bitumen, lignite, iron, nickel, chromium and copper. Thanks to these riches, the industry of mining and processing has an ever more important position in the structure of our industry. In chromium mining, Albania ranks among the leading countries in Europe. A brief historical survey. The discoveries to date about the beginnings of human life on Albanian soil take us back to the end of the Middle Paleolithic Age and the beginning of the Iron Age. Valuable materials of the prehistoric period have been found at Zara, Butrint, and Finig of the Saranda district, at the foot of Mt-D in Tirana, at Gruamire and Dukajan of the Shkodra district and at Nepravishta in Gjirokastra district. Of special importance has been the discovery of the prehistoric center of habitation at Malik of Korea. This center, which was discovered by workers while draining a swamp, is of special importance to the study of the prehistory of the Balkans. The ancestors of the Albanians were the Illyrians. It is thought that during the Bronze Age and the beginning of the Iron Age, these people dwelt in Central Europe and, later, spread south to the western part of the Balkan Peninsula down to the Gulf of Arta. In northern Greece the Illyrians had their own language, but so far no written text has been found. A number of words quoted by ancient authors as well as many names of persons, centers of habitation, rivers, etc., are known. The first historical documents about the Illyrians begin from the 7th and 6th century before our era. On the basis of various documents, the Illyrians enjoyed a relatively well-developed economy and, as a consequence, a high level of culture and social organization. The development of the means of production brought about class differentiation within the tribes and among them. This led also to the subjugation of some tribes by others. The most important communities were the Incalis, Tall Ants, Dardans, Liburnians, Ardians, and so on. These changes brought about the establishment of the relations of slave ownership in the society of the Illyrian groups. Cities like Shkodra, Amantia, in the Vlora district, Bilis, in the Malastra district, Finig, in the Saranda district, etc. sprang up. From the beginning of the 4th century these cities minted their own coins. The federations of tribes later led to the setting up of Illyrian states. History speaks especially of the state of Ankalaia, southeastern Albania, that of the Tall Ants in the coastal region as well as that of the Malozi in the south down to the Gulf of Arta. These Illyrian states flourished during the 5th, 4th, and 3rd centuries before our era. We find them in good relations with the neighboring states as well as in relations of rivalry and war. At the head of these states stand out such political and military leaders as Bardhile, Pyrrhus, and Glaudi. During the 3rd century before our era there was also another outstanding Illyrian state, that of the Ardians, which extended from the Dalmatian coast to the south, subjugating the state of the Tall Ants. Shkodra became the capital of this kingdom. The state of the Ardians reached the peak of its power during the reign of King Agran, who died in the year 221 before our era, leaving his wife, Tuda, at the head of his kingdom. The state of the Ardians, which had succeeded in conquering Greek colony cities along the Adriatic coast and on a number of islands of the Adriatic, also became a naval power of considerable strength. This was very disturbing to Rome, which at that time was rising to the height of its power and intended to extend it to the eastern shores of the Adriatic and Ionian seas, and to conquer the Balkan Peninsula. This led to war in September of the year 229 before our era. The war between the Illyrians and the Romans continued up to 167 before our era when Rome succeeded in occupying the entire kingdom of the Ardians and those of Epirus and Macedonia. For the Illyrians, a difficult period of 5 centuries of Roman bondage began. The invaders ransacked and plundered nearly 100 cities and made slaves of over 150,000 men and women. 7. During the first centuries of Roman occupation, Illyria became the starting point of the main highways which linked Rome with the eastern provinces of the empire. The occupationists tried to Romanize the Illyrian regions, but the natives resisted Romanization, especially the mountain tribes, which became the bastion of the valuable traditions and priceless values of the spiritual creativeness of the people. The historians make mention of these tribes. Ptolemy, the historian of Alexandria, speaks also of the tribe of Albanoi, between present-day Durs and Dibra. The name Albania comes from this tribe. Today the Albanians call their land Shqipëri. Frequent powerful uprisings, which shook Rome, broke out in Illyria. The uprising, headed by the Illyrian leader Bato, set in motion about 200,000 Illyrians, who liberated many districts and made preparations to cross over to the Apennine Peninsula. In spite of this, the Illyrians took an active part in the political and social life of Rome. Rome considered the Illyrian military contingents as very reliable detachments in defending the borders from the onslaught of the barbarians. Many Illyrian military leaders even succeeded in being chosen as emperor. History records 7 emperors of Illyrian origin, the most prominent of whom was Diocletian. Of course, as the ruler of the Illyrian provinces for centuries on end, Rome also assimilated the physical and mental energies of the inhabitants of the occupied countries. Illyrian master craftsmen left their mark on the monumental works of Roman architecture, in arts and crafts and many other fields. In 395 AD, the Roman Empire was split into 2 parts. Illyria remained in the Eastern Empire. The conditions of its enslavement remained nearly as before, except that now the Illyrian provinces were no longer at the center but on the western periphery of the empire. At first, this new situation exerted a positive influence on the economic and social development of the country. The Illyrian ports became important centers of trade. Vissa linked the east with the west. Dyrrhachium, Durs of Arfini Bani and of its prosperity. The same is true of Phaeus and Achaea, other cities. Later, the Illyrian provinces, eastern part of the Byzantine Empire, were the first to have to face the furious onslaught of the so-called barbarian tribes, which came from the Apennine Peninsula or down the Dalmatian coast. In the year 395, the horde of Visigoths headed by Alaric descended upon the Balkans, plundering and devastating Illyria, Macedonia, and Greece. In 441, the Illyrian province of Dardania, present-day Kosovo, was overrun by the Huns under Attila, while the Ostrogoths came in 461. Towards the end of the 5th century, groups of Turanian Bulgarian barbarians attacked the Byzantine Empire from the east and reached the Adriatic. These onslaughts continued during the 6th century. Especially during the 7th century, groups of Slavs came and settled in the various districts of Albania. They created many villages and began to till the soil. In spite of this, the bulk of the population, which was made up of natives, was concentrated mainly in the rugged mountain regions and engaged in raising livestock. This colonization by the Slavs created a danger of its own, that of assimilation. But the natives overcame this danger, too. Thus they entered the medieval period under a new name, that of Albany, Albanese. During the 10th and 11th centuries, the old slave-owning system was in complete collapse in Albania, and now elements characteristic of the period of feudalism appeared. But social development was hampered by the ceaseless wars, by the oppressive measures of the empire, and by the influx of foreigners. In 1082 Albania was invaded by the Normans. 14 years later, the hordes of the First Crusade passed through it. During the 12th century, it was again overrun by 2 Norman onslaughts. During the 12th century, the feudal system had crystallized more clearly in the remote regions of Albania. A feudal nobility of purely Albanian origin was created in these zones. Gradually gaining strength, these nobles came into conflict with the power of the princes of the Byzantine and Slav occupations. The native feudal chiefs increasingly aimed at settling accounts with the foreigners and establishing an independent state. The opportunity presented itself towards the end of the 12th century when the Byzantine Empire was plunged into a deep political crisis. In 1190, the Albanian feudal chief set up an independent principality, the first Albanian feudal state we know of. This principality extended over Albania, with Kruha as its capital. However, this principality could not be consolidated because of conflicts with the other feudal principalities and foreign powers at the time of the Fourth Crusade and because of the growing strength of the Venetian Republic. The 13th and 14th centuries are characterized by rapid economic development of the Albanian provinces. More land was brought under cultivation, the production of grain, olives, grapes, and livestock products increased. Artisan production trade flourished in the cities. The situation also brought about pronounced class differentiation and increased the political and economic potential of the local feudal chiefs. Thus a powerful stratum of Albanian nobility was created. From 1330 there were a few outstanding feudal families like the Topias, who ruled the region between the Mati and the Shkumbani rivers, the Muzakas, between the Shkumbani and Samani rivers, and the Dukagini in the north. In the 14th century, following the collapse of Stefan Dushan's Serbian Empire, there began to come into prominence other Albanian feudal families, which having ousted the Serbian rulers, extended their power greatly. But these feudal families, which also attacked the commercial cities, came into conflict with one another. This created a grave situation of feudal anarchy from which the strongest gained. Some of these feudal dynasties began to rise to the rank of principalities, like the Topias, Balshas, Muzakas, Shpatas in the south, and others. Towards the end of the 14th century, a new invasion threatened Albania, that of the Ottoman Turks. During the 80s of the 14th century, the Turkish forces entered the Albanian provinces on two occasions. In 1389 a coalition was formed in the Balkans for defense against the Turks. The decisive battle was fought on the plain of Kosova and was won by the Turks. In the battle they lost their Sultan Murat. The end of the 14th and the beginning of the 15th centuries marked the invasion of the Albanian districts, partly by the Turks and partly by the Venetians. In the course of the conflicts among the big feudal chiefs during the 14th century, at the beginning of the 5th century three new dynasties appeared, the Dukaginis in the north, the caste riots in central Albania and the Aranitis in the south. These dynasties were to play an important role in the major political and military events of the 15th century, during the legendary wars for freedom of the Albanian people led by Joy. Caste riot, whom the Turks called Skanderbeg. The savage Ottoman rule, during the first part of the 15th century sparked off powerful revolts and uprisings in various districts of Albania. The most powerful of these uprisings was that of the Aranitis, which broke out in 1432. For 2 years the Albanians of the southern provinces scored brilliant victories which echoed throughout the whole country, as well as in Europe. But these uprisings were only the forerunners of that great 25-year-long fight which the Albanians waged under the leadership of Skanderbeg against the furious assault of the Ottoman forces led by two of the most powerful sultans, Sultan Murat II and Muhammad II the Victorious. Joy was the youngest son of Jan Caste Riot. He is believed to have been born in 1405. He was still very young when, together with his brothers, he was taken hostage by the Sultan. He was brought up at the Sultan's court and attended a military school there. He stood out for his keenness of mind, his powerful physique and his military talent. He won fame and glory in various battles. But he never forgot his own country and his people. He found the opportunity in November 1443, at the time of the defeat of the Turkish army in the battles against the Hungarian forces, when he and a handful of loyal supporters came to Kruha and seized power. On November 28, 1443, the flag of the Castriatis, a red flag with a black, double-headed eagle in the middle, which later became the national flag of Albania, was raised over Kruha Castle. The most urgent problem on the order of the day for Skanderbeg and the country as a whole was to unite the forces and prepare them to face the fury of the sultans, which would not be long in bursting upon them. This was the purpose of the Council of Laza, which was opened on March 2, 1444, in the city of Laza, ancient Lycius. 3 months later the Turkish armies were at the gates of Albania. The first battle between the Albanian forces under Skanderbeg and those of the Turks under Ali Pasha took place on the Torvili plain, east of the present town of Libraj. The Turkish forces numbered 25,000 men, while Skanderbeg had about 10,000 fighters. The Albanians scored a brilliant victory. This strengthened the unity of the country and aroused confidence among the people. It had loud repercussions in Europe, too, which was feverishly preparing to face the Turkish menace. 2 further Turkish expeditions were dispatched during 1445 and 1446. While the forces of the Albanian League were busy defending themselves from the Ottomans, the Republic of St. Mark was hatching up intrigues behind their backs. The Venetians were afraid that the strengthening of Skanderbeg's position might endanger their colonies, the commercial cities on the coast. This circumstance led to open war between Venice and Skanderbeg's forces, which continued throughout the years 1447 and 1448, 7. Meanwhile, a huge Ottoman army of 100,000 led by Sultan Murat II himself, had set out for Albania in the spring of 1448. The situation was becoming very serious for the Albanians, who would soon be between two fires. With lightning speed, Skanderbeg undertook a vigorous operation in the Shkodra region and smashed the Venetian forces on July 23. After a series of fierce battles with the Albanian forces, Sultan Murat failed to achieve any success and returned to his capital to make preparations against the renewed offensive which Hunyadi of Hungary was about to launch against him. The Turks smashed the Hungarian forces in October 1448. The Albanians now remained alone to face the Ottoman hurricane. With a new army of about 100,000 men, Sultan Murat now returned to Albania. Skanderbeg was able to mobilize only about 18,000 fighters. After fierce fighting, in May the Ottoman troops laid siege to Kruha, which was defended by a small garrison of Albanians. Skanderbeg, with most of his forces, remained outside the siege, launching surprise attacks on the invaders from the rear. After trying in vain, all through the summer to take Kruha Castle, the Turkish forces were obliged to withdraw after losing one-fifth of their forces in battle. Simultaneously with his military activities, Skanderbeg had also to develop a very clever diplomacy in order to create alliances with those foreign forces, especially in Italy, who were interested in Skanderbeg's victory. Good relations were created, especially with the Kingdom of Naples, a rival of the Republic of St. Mark. On the other hand, it was also necessary to overcome the resistance of certain local feudal chiefs who feared the growth of Skanderbeg's authority and tried to prevent the establishment of his centralized power. Some of these feudal chiefs went so far as to betray and place themselves in the service of the enemy. Skanderbeg was able to overcome this threat and managed to form a centralized Albanian state. The 12 years of continued wars and the complicated internal and external situation had created a very grave situation for Albania. Precisely at this moment, Sultan Muhammad II, who 4 years before had conquered Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, decided to put an end to the Albanian resistance. Towards the end of spring in 1457, a Turkish army, 80,000 strong, under the command of the famous General Isa B. Evrenos, set out for Albania. The Turkish army entered Albania, sowing terror and devastation. Skanderbeg had to resort to a very clever tactic. After short battles he left the impression on the enemy that he had been defeated. And precisely when the unsuspecting enemy were celebrating their victory, he launched a surprise attack on them on the plain of Albulina, completely destroying the invading forces. This brilliant victory had great repercussions, not only from the military, but also from the political point of view. After undertaking a number of other feudal expeditions, Sultan Muhammad II proposed an armistice for 3 years. Skanderbeg accepted this offer with a view to gaining time to consolidate the economy of the country and reorganize his forces. He took the opportunity to go to the aid of his ally, the King of Naples, who was in a critical situation, 1461. But on the urging of Venice, the Sultan broke the terms of the armistice in 1462. Skanderbeg hastened back home and smashed 3 new Turkish expeditions. In 1463, the Sultan was obliged to seek a 10-year peace agreement with Skanderbeg. Skanderbeg accepted it. However, the peace did not last long. At the end of 1463 the fighting began again. The years 1464 to 1465 were years of fierce battles. The Ottoman expeditions failed, one after the other. In June 1466, on the eve of the harvest, Sultan Muhammad XI himself came to Albania at the head of an army of 150,000 men. Kruha was besieged again. The situation became very critical. Skanderbeg sought aid in weapons and provisions from Venice, Naples, and Rome. He, himself, went to Italy. They paid him great homage, but gave him no aid. Nevertheless, after fierce battles under the walls of Kruha, the Albanians forced the Turks to abandon the field of battle in April 1467. But in July Sultan Muhammad II with all his army appeared in Albania again, and after bloody battles, once more succeeded in laying siege to Kruha. He suffered very heavy losses, and 3 weeks later lifted the siege and departed from Albania. In spite of the victories scored in the field of battle, the situation in Albania had become very alarming. There were shortages of arms, foodstuffs, and men. Skanderbeg strove to renew the Albanian League of the year 1444. He called the Albanian princes together in Lazat in January 1468, but just at this time he fell gravely ill and died in Lazat on January 17, 1468. For Albania, Skanderbeg's death was a very great loss. For a quarter of a century, Albania had managed to withstand the waves of the Ottoman invasion. However, even after Skanderbeg's death, for a few more decades it managed to continue the armed struggle. Sultan Muhammad II had to come back again to Albania in person in 1478. Kruha fell in July of that year. The Sultan turned on Shkodra, which resisted until January 1479. Partial, but fierce uprisings continued up to 1505. The 25 Years' War of the Albanians under Skanderbeg became a source of inspiration for the coming generations through the centuries. The leader of these battles, Skanderbeg, became the symbol of the resistance of the Albanian people. Writers and artists of various genres have produced hundreds of artistic works about him, and are still doing so to this day. During these periods, tens of thousands of Albanians with their families were driven abroad to foreign lands, mainly to southern Italy. To this day they preserve Albanian ethnic features. The invaders established their savage military rule in Albania, although some regions, like Himara, Dukagjini, the Shkodra Highlands, Dibra, etc., did not submit to Ottoman law. During the 16th and 17th centuries, these regions became centers of resistance against the invaders. In June 1594, basing their hopes on the coalition of the European countries against Turkey, the chiefs of the Albanian highlands assembled in the Mati region and sought supplies of weapons from the coalition. But no aid was given. Again in 1601 a similar convention was organized, which sent a delegation to Europe, but it was unable to secure any aid. The invaders organized a number of operations during the years 1610, 1612 and 1615. The 17th century saw the positions of the military authorities in the outlying districts of the empire become greatly weakened, while those of the local chiefs became stronger and stronger. The cities, too, marked good progress, especially in the extension of artisan production and trade. Shkodra, Prizren, Berat, Gjirokastra, Elbasan, and Foskopaja are mentioned at this period. Some elementary schools also began to be opened. But the development of education was hampered by religion, which split the people into three groups: Muslims, Orthodox, and Catholics, and the school teachers were trained either in the Islamic Oriental culture, or in Greek or Latin culture. In the city of Foskopaja there was even a secondary school called the New Academy. In 1720 a printery which published books was opened in that city. Although the 17th and 18th centuries marked some degree of economic and cultural progress in the country, the development of national culture was impeded in every way by the foreign rulers and religious obscurantism. According to documents discovered, the Albanian language began to be written from the 16th century. In 1555 Jan Buzoka published a religious book, which is considered the first book written in Albanian. Other patriots, like Jeter Buddy, 1566-1622, Frank Bardi, 1606-1645, Jeter Bogdani, 1625-1684, also wrote in Albanian. Many other Albanians displayed their talents in painting, architecture, and other fields. The people preserved in their bosom a priceless treasury of folklore, which became their spiritual nourishment for centuries on end, and protected them from assimilation by foreigners. From the end of the 18th century, the central power of the Turkish Empire had become weaker. Separatist trends had gained strength among the big feudal chiefs who had greatly enriched and strengthened themselves during conflicts with their weaker neighbors. In the Albanian regions two great feudal duchies had emerged, that of the Bushitlis of Shkodra in the north and that of Ali Pasha Teplina in the south. A series of very prominent figures headed the Shkodra duchy, but the most famous of them was Kara Mahmud Pasha Bushitli, who ruled from 1775 to 1796. Having conquered his feudal rivals, he began to openly oppose the authority of the Sublime Porte. The Sultan sent repeated expeditions to subjugate the Shkodra duchy but failed to achieve his end. The Turkish armies were defeated time and again. Kara Mahmud Pasha extended his domain from Montenegro to central Albania and Kosovo. Within his duchy the economy began to develop and trade and social life flourished. The same phenomenon as in northern Albania also took place in southern Albania. By means of guile and his daring actions, Ali Teplina, the son of a minor feudal chieftain, left fatherless when still a child, exploited situations, and managed to win such favor with the Sultan that he was entrusted with important posts. But when he felt strong enough, he turned his back on the Sultan. He began to act entirely independently, not only in internal affairs, but also in foreign policy. His duchy with Yanina as its center, extended from Vlora and Berat to Gamaria and Thessaly. Yanina became a center with a lively international diplomatic movement, while the Pasha became a romantic figure. Thus in 1812, the whole territory of Albania was included in the two above-mentioned duchies. Having overcome the difficulties of the wars, which burst out against it from the beginning of the 19th century, the Sublime Porte took energetic measures against the Bushitlis and Ali Pasha Teplina. In 1820, the Turks laid siege to Yanina. After a long resistance, which continued for nearly 2 years, the Turks managed to kill Ali Pasha in January 1822, thus putting an end to the Duchy of Yanina. After this, the Sultan turned his attention to the Bushitlis, and in 1831 re-established the central authority in the Duchy of Shkodra, too. In order to strengthen its central authority, the Sublime Porte proclaimed the reforms known as the Tanzimat. Among the Albanians these reforms aroused all-round opposition. In the 40s of the 19th century, whole regions rose in arms, both in the south and in the north. But the objectives of these uprisings were limited. They were directed only against the reforms, against taxes, and military service. In the most progressive Albanian circles inside the country and abroad, it became clear that these limited movements had no powerful political backing nor any clear perspectives. It was necessary to strive to give the movement a national basis according to the most advanced ideas of the time in Europe, a national basis and an objective of separation from Turkey. Thus began the first efforts for the Albanian national movement with its earliest representatives, Unveiling 1797–1859, and later, Jeroniam de Rada, who crystallized in their writings the idea of the Albanian national movement and the necessity of spreading education in the Albanian language. Unveiling even worked out a special alphabet for this purpose. But the Albanian national movement underwent rapid development especially during the second half of the 19th century. The struggle of the Albanians against the Turkish reforms was followed with interest both in the Balkans, as well as by the European powers. The latter, both before and after the Russo-Turkish Crimean War, were for keeping Turkey as a counterbalance to the Russian intentions in southeastern Europe and the Mediterranean. However, no one thought about the demand of the Albanians, and neither the big powers nor the neighboring countries supported the struggle of the Albanians for the creation of an Albania detached from Turkey. Indeed, the intention of the ruling circles of the neighboring countries was to partition Albania among themselves. In 1861, secret negotiations were held between Serbia and Greece aiming at dividing the Albanian territory between them as soon as the Turks withdrew. But among the Albanians, national consciousness had been awakened. The best representatives of the country fully understood the danger threatening the nation and thus began that great movement, which is known in the history of Albania as the Albanian National Renaissance. The ultimate objective of this movement was to ensure the independence of Albania, to set up an Albanian state which would develop as the other states in Europe. The movement developed in three main directions: in struggle to preserve the territorial integrity of Albania against the chauvinist aims of the neighboring states and the deals between the big powers; second, in struggle for separation from Turkey; and, third, towards the national awakening, the spread of education and culture in the Albanian language and on the basis of ancient Albanian traditions. Of special importance at this stage of history was the League of Prizren, an Albanian patriotic organization, which arose as an historical necessity to direct and organize the movement. This organization emerged on the initiative of a secret committee formed in Constantinople in 1878, and made up of outstanding patriots like Abdul Frashëri, Pashko Veza, Sami Frashëri, Yanni Frito, and others. This was the time when, after the Balkan crisis of the years 1875 and 1876, Turkey was obliged to recognize the establishment of autonomous provinces in the Balkans. Later, after Russia went to war with Turkey in 1877, the vanquished Turks were compelled to revise the clauses of the St. Stefano Treaty on March 3, 1878. In this treaty Albania was not even mentioned. Indeed, many Albanian provinces were annexed to Serbia, Montenegro, and Bulgaria. This aroused a wave of irrepressible indignation in the Albanian provinces. In order to revise the clauses of the St. Stefano Treaty, the European great powers decided to call the Congress of Berlin in June 1878. The Albanian Committee in Istanbul saw the urgency of summoning an Albanian assembly as widely representative as possible in order to raise before the world the rights of the Albanian nation. This convention met in the city of Prizren, now in Yugoslavia, only 3 days prior to the opening of the Berlin Congress. The convention created the League of Prizren with branches in all the provinces of Albania. It immediately dispatched a memorandum to the Congress of Berlin. But the Albanian claims were not taken into account. Then it became necessary to fight, arms in hand, to defend every inch of Albanian territory. Worthy of mention were the battles fought in defense of the northern provinces of Plava and Gocija, Hot, Gruda, Ulkani, etc. On the other front of the struggle for the autonomy of Albania, the patriots encountered innumerable difficulties and the rabid opposition of the Sublime Porte. This struggle, like that to prevent the dismemberment of Albania, was combined with the struggle to spread education, knowledge, and the national consciousness. Such distinguished personalities as the great poet Naim Frashëri, 1846–1900, Sami Frashëri, 1850–1904, and Nzako C. Gajupi, 1856–1930, became the ideologists and fiery promoters of patriotic sentiments, standard bearers of the unity of the Albanian nation without distinction as to religion or social standing. For 3 decades, this fierce struggle continued in the 3 directions mentioned. The movement gained momentum. The fight for territorial integrity was waged in all fields with arms and in the political and diplomatic fields. Books in the Albanian language were published abroad in Romania, Bulgaria, Egypt, Italy, and elsewhere. Newspapers and magazines dealing with Albanian problems began to be published and distributed illegally. The first Albanian school was opened at Korçë on March 7, 1887. Towards the end of the 19th century, the Albanian question was batted back and forth through the diplomatic chancelleries of the great powers. In April 1900, the Albanian patriot, Ismail Kemal, who up to that time had carried out important functions in the Ottoman administration and was known throughout the empire as a progressive politician and an outstanding diplomat, left Turkey in a demonstrative manner. In exile he carried out all-round activity to invigorate and direct the national movement. During the early years of the 19th century, the Balkans were seething with passions and conflicts among states wanting to grab territories from one another. The Albanian provinces in particular became the prey of chauvinistic activities of neighbors, who devastated whole regions by activities of banditry and killed Albanian patriots. Faced with such a situation, the Albanian national movement had to step up its armed actions both against the forces of occupation as well as against the chauvinist bands of the neighbors. New patriotic figures began to appear. A group of young patriots with revolutionary tendencies formed a secret committee in Monastir, by Tolje, in November 1905, and created branches throughout Albania. This committee, together with its regional subcommittees, in collaboration with the patriotic associations abroad, carried out a great deal of propaganda work for the mobilization of the people to undertake military activities for the independence of the country. The president of the Monastir Committee, Bejo Tapulai, a former director of the Turkish secondary school in Monastir, personally took the initiative to form a fighting unit, SETA, an initiative which was quickly followed by the other committees in the country. Fighting actions began to be carried out everywhere. The movement of the Young Turks and the proclamation of the constitution by Sultan Abdulhamid created some illusions among certain Albanian patriotic circles. But this situation did not last long. The disillusionment caused very strong indignation and revolt throughout the country. It was clearly seen that the Albanians could solve their problems only by relying on their own armed struggle. At the same time, the legal means were utilized to extend the patriotic movement, to open clubs, Albanian schools, and the alphabet which is used today was laid down definitively. The first Albanian secondary school was opened in Elbasan in December 1909. Through their acts of oppression and exploitation, the Young Turks sparked off the outbreak of a powerful uprising, which started first in the district of Priština in the spring of 1910, and later in that of Pija, and spread all over the province of Kosova. The Turks dispatched a special army corps under the command of Shevket Turgut Pasha, a general of the Prussian school against the rebels. A bloody battle took place at the end of April 1910, at the Kakonika Pass. After heroic resistance, the Albanian insurgents commanded by Idris Sefri were forced to withdraw, but the movement was so widespread that the Turkish Minister of War came himself, leading fresh troops, to reinforce Turgut Pasha's contingent. Having overrun Kosova, the Turks then turned to the districts of Shkodra and central Albania, spreading destruction and terror. Faced with this situation, the Albanian patriots saw the vital need to unite all their forces in a single armed national movement and to launch an offensive without waiting for the opponents to attack. On April 6, 1911, Ded Jololi, the leader of the uprising in the Shkodra highlands, was forced by King Nicola of Montenegro, who had given the Highlanders refuge, to start the uprising prematurely. This confused the plans of the general uprising. The insurgents of the Shkodra highlands fought heroically against the Turkish divisions. The Turkish government was unable to carry its military operation right through to the end. The Albanian patriots, headed by Ismail Kemal and a new figure, which was making a name in the movement, Luigi Gurakuki, 1879–1925, gathered at Jers in Montenegro on June 23, I9I1, sent a memorandum to the Turkish government demanding the territorial and administrative autonomy of Albania. Such Albanian patriots continued the political struggle for the autonomy of Albania also within the Turkish parliament. But in 1912, the situation in the Balkans had again become acute. Taking advantage of the difficulties of Turkey, which was in conflict with Italy over Tripoli, the Balkan kings thought that the time was ripe to satisfy their greed by annexing the Albanian territories. New uprisings broke out. In April 1912, that of the Jakova highlands began and spread to the whole of Kosovo, then to southern Albania, to central Albania and to the north. The insurgents in Kosovo led by Hasan Priishtina, Bajram Kurnri and others marched on Shkup, in Macedonia, which they captured on August 12, 1912. Likewise other forces liberated the towns of Fir, Permit, etc. In October 1912, the Balkan states declared war on Turkey with the aim of dividing among them the territories which Turkey still held in the Balkans. They turned their greedy eyes especially towards the Albanian territories. The situation became very critical for the Albanians. Towards the end of October, in pursuit of the Turkish army, the armies of the Balkan states entered the Albanian territories. It was precisely at this time that Ismail Kemal left Turkey and visited a number of countries in Europe. He was well aware that it was necessary to act quickly and with determination no longer for the autonomy of Albania, but for the complete detachment of Albania from Turkey and for independence. He took this initiative on his own, and at the same time when the Greek, Serbian and Montenegrin armies had occupied almost the whole of Albania, he came to Albania and with a group of patriots hoisted the national flag in Vlora on November 28, 1912. Albania was proclaimed an independent state. After nearly 5 centuries of bondage, the Albanian people had succeeded in setting up their first government, headed by Ismail Kemal. Right from the start, the new Albanian state had to face many difficulties. The intrigues of foreign powers and its internal differences gave the country no time to consolidate its victory. During the year 1913, after many negotiations, the imperialist great powers defined, at the London Conference of Ambassadors, the boundaries of the Albanian state. These boundaries included no more than half the Albanian territory, nearly 28,000 square kilometers, with a population of about 800,000. Under the pretext of calming the situation in Albania, the great powers decided on July 29, 1913 to send a German prince, Wilhelm Weid, to rule in Albania. Ismail Kemal was forced to resign from the Vlora government. But the foreign prince did nothing to put the life of the country in order, to liberate the territories which had been left outside the borders and unite them with the Albanian state. He set up a government with feudal elements. Because of a big uprising of the peasantry, on September 3, 1914, the prince had to leave Albania. During World War I, the situation was further complicated. Albania was occupied by the belligerent powers. On April 26, 1915, the 4 powers of the Entente signed the secret Treaty of London, which divided Albania among Italy, Greece, Serbia, and Montenegro. When the World War was over, the 3 signatory powers of the secret Treaty of London, Britain, France, and Italy, as well as the USA agreed that the clauses of the treaty about the partition of Albania should be implemented. Russia, where the power of the Soviets had now been established, opposed the treaty. Indeed, Lenin exposed this treaty worldwide by publishing it in the press. This critical situation impelled the Albanian patriotic circles to take measures and act quickly in order to save the fatherland. A patriotic government had to be set up to take the fate of the country into its own hands. But under the conditions in which the Italian army held the whole of Albania under occupation, with the exception of Korça and Shkodra where there were French troops, the setting up of such a government was very difficult. At the peace conference, which was held at Versailles on January 18, 1919, an Albanian delegation took part. The conference failed to solve the Albanian problem, and afterwards the situation remained very tense. At the beginning of 1920, the Albanian patriots organized a national congress which was to take measures to save the nation. The congress was opened in the town of Lushnja on January 28, 1920, and took decisions of historic importance. The congress also formed a new government and a delegation to the peace conference. After it was shifted from Lushnja to Tirana, the new government began to exercise its functions. Among other things, it demanded the withdrawal of foreign forces from Albania. Italy concentrated these forces in the zone of Vlora with a view to annexing it. It was clearly seen that the Italian troops could be driven out of Vlora only by force of arms. For this purpose a committee of national defense was secretly set up inside the city. This committee, in secret agreement with the Tirana government, issued the call for an armed uprising against the Italian imperialists. Thousands of armed volunteers from all over Albania gathered around the zone occupied by the Italians. On June 3, the committee sent the Italian command an ultimatum, which it refused to accept. The assault for the liberation of Vlora began on June 5. From the very first days, the Albanian patriots scored major successes against two Italian divisions well protected in strongly fortified positions. The War of Vlora raged fiercely for weeks on end. The Albanian patriots displayed rare heroism and reached the outskirts of the city. Italy was compelled, at last, to sign an agreement with the Tirana government and to withdraw its troops from Vlora. However, it kept the island of Sazan at the entrance to the Bay of Vlora. Meanwhile, the armed forces of the Tirana government under the command of the patriot Bajram Kuri, had launched a large-scale operation against the rebellion of Esad Pasha Toptan's forces. Esad Pasha was forced to flee the country, only to concoct new intrigues abroad, but he was shot dead in Paris on June 13, 1920, by Avni Rustem, 1895–1924, a young patriot, who was emerging as an outstanding figure in the democratic and revolutionary movement. The victory in the War of Vlora consolidated the international position of Albania. Now the Tirana government and the patriotic forces turned their attention towards strengthening the internal situation. The problems to be solved were very complicated since neither Yugoslavia nor Greece had given up their intrigues and their old aims. In the struggle to take over the government of the country, two distinct political groups emerged: the Progressive Party, which represented the interests of the big landowners, the conservative bourgeoisie and the top clergy, and the Popular Party, which was based on the broad masses of the people. The political struggle between these two main trends became more and more acute. These two trends also produced their most conspicuous representatives. Among the democratic forces, Luigi Gurakuki, Bajram Kuri, the young patriot Avni Rustamai, Fan Esnali and others, played a special role. From the reactionary side, a young feudal chieftain, Ahmet Bey Zogali, or Ahmet Zogu, as he preferred to call himself, began to emerge as a prominent figure. Ambitious and an intriguer, he managed to occupy important posts in the Tirana government and gradually to take the power into his own hands. Faced with such a situation, the democratic forces of the Popular Party, led by Fan Esnali, Luigi Gurakuji, and others, formed a new opposition front in parliament. In October, a political organization, Bashkimi, headed by Avni Rustamai, was formed outside parliament. Through intrigues and Bonapartist actions, Zog concentrated all power in his own hands. The forces of the opposition understood clearly that the country could be saved from the feudal dictatorship of Zog only through energetic action. On April 20, 1924, Zog's agents made an attempt on the life of the patriot, Avni Rustamai, who died 2 days later from the wounds he received. Public outrage against the assassination of Avni Rustamai led to an uprising against the Zogite clique. On June 10 the democratic forces entered Tirana. Ahmed Zog and his clique of Beys fled abroad. On June 16 the democratic government headed by Fan Nali was formed. The program of the Fan Nali government contained the main principles of a bourgeois democratic state. On the other hand, Ahmed Zog was making preparations in Yugoslavia for revenge, and the government failed to take the necessary steps to forestall the danger. In December 1924, with the direct assistance of the Yugoslav ruling circles, Ahmed Zog returned to Albania, overthrew the Nali government and made himself president of the republic. Thus began the period of Zogite clique's savage rule. Zog pursued the policy of ruthless suppression of every democratic movement. On March 2, 1925, his agents killed Luigi Gurakuji in Bari of Italy. On March 29, 1925, they besieged and killed Bajram Kuri in the Tropaha district. Zog threw open the door to the foreign imperialists to come and exploit the resources of the country and the Albanian people. He rewarded Yugoslavia by giving it part of the territory of Albania. On November 27, 1926, Zog signed a pact of friendship and security with Italy, while 1 year later, on November 22, 1927, he signed the Second Tirana Pact, called the Treaty of the Defense Alliance for a 20-year period. Thus, from that time, Italy took over the economy and the equipment, and the instruction of the army. Vlora remained an open port for the Italian navy. In internal affairs, the Zog regime increased the oppression and exploitation of the broad working masses, of town and countryside even further. The heavy taxes had the same form as those left by the regime of Ottoman occupation. Culture and education remained in a backward state. The regime gave the imperialist powers a free hand to exert their influence through the schools and education. The rapprochement with Italy and the many economic and political concessions which Ahmed Zog, as president of the Albanian Republic, made to Mussolini, enabled him to realize one of his cherished ambitions. On September 1, 1928, the Constituent Assembly proclaimed Albania a kingdom and Ahmed Zog king of the Albanians. By demagogy, Zog I, this was what the king was now called, tried to quell the indignation of the masses. He loudly proclaimed a number of reforms, and drafted some laws on the pattern of the laws of the Western bourgeois states. But almost none of them were implemented. The agrarian reform about which there was so much boasting affected only about 8,000 hectares of state or private land, nearly all swamp. On the problem of foreign concessions, too, the reign of Zog did nothing but concentrate these concessions in the hands of Italian capital. Despite the savage Zogist reaction, the democratic and revolutionary movement was not wiped out. The oppressed masses expressed their protest against the exploitation by foreign capital and against the regime in various ways. In 1928, some progressive elements formed the first communist cell in Korga. Communist ideas had long begun to spread in Albania, but from that time onward, the revolutionary forces within the country began to organize. In June 1929, the representatives of the Korka communist cells held a meeting and set up a committee. This marked the creation of the first communist group in Albania, which was followed by other groups later. Under the influence of these groups, associations of workers and artisans were created. The communist, Ali Kelmendi, played an important role in the ideological and organizational orientation of the Korka group and the other communist groups. While abroad, he had been in contact with the Comintern and he returned to Albania where he helped in the formation of the communist movement. Anti-Zogist elements attempted a number of times to overthrow the Zogist regime. But these attempts were more of the nature of plots and failed. In Albania, the world economic crisis lasted longer than in other countries. In an artificial way, Fascist Italy, which had the keys to the economy in its hands, created such conditions as to compel Albania to grant further concessions. At first Zog tried to resist with the aim of preserving something for himself, but finally he was obliged to submit to Mussolini's political, military, and economic pressure. From this period, 1934 to 1935, Zog put Albania in complete subservience to Italy. In August 1935, anti-Zogist elements again tried unsuccessfully to overthrow the regime. The uprising, which is known as the Fieri uprising, insufficiently organized and including wavering elements, was crushed right at the start. In order to calm the situation, in October 1975, Zog appointed a new liberal government. But the liberalism of this government was entirely formal, because when the workers of the Kujava oil fields called a strike in order to demand their rights from the Italian proprietors, the government took sides with the latter and put down the workers' movement with violence. The situation which was created imparted a fresh impulse to the clandestine development of the communist movement, the only revolutionary movement with a perspective to save the country both from the Zogite oppression and from the menace of fascist occupation. The communist elements abroad, like all Kelmendi and others, helped in spreading communist ideas and in organizing the movement. Many communists and revolutionary elements went to the aid of the Spanish people fighting to defend the Republic from the intervention of the fascists and Nazis. Zog sensed the danger of the communist movement in Albania. On the eve of the occupation of Albania by fascist Italy, the organs of his dictatorship launched a savage campaign against the communist movement, many arrests were made and a large number of revolutionary elements were imprisoned or interned. The economic and political agreements concluded between Rome and Tirana in March 1936 paved the way for the Italian military occupation of Albania. Mussolini now awaited only the opportune moment to act. Having received Hitler's support for his aggressive plans, and silent approval of the Western powers, at the beginning of 1939 he began to carry out his plans. Through the agents of his fifth column in Albania, Mussolini had taken measures to sabotage the resistance of the Albanian people. At dawn on April 7, 1939, the fascist troops began to land on the Albanian shores. The Albanian army had been left without ammunition, the few pieces of artillery had been sabotaged by the fascist instructors. Nevertheless, in Durrës, Vlora, Saranda, Shëngjin and everywhere, the invading Italian troops encountered the armed resistance of the Albanian patriots. Groups of soldiers and volunteers who managed to secure some ammunition made the enemy bleed. The Italian fleet bombarded Durrës and the other ports. The Italian Air Force carried out incursions over the cities of Albania. King Zogaj with his royal family and his clique abandoned the country and fled abroad. With demagogy and terror, Italian fascism tried to suppress any expression of patriotic feeling or resistance among the people. It tried to create the illusion that under Mussolini's empire, Albania would develop and flourish. But in fact this demagogy was very soon shown up in its true colors. The Albanian people were well aware that fascist Italy had occupied the country. It was preparing for new adventures against the other Balkan countries. The hatred of the people for the fascist invaders, which was expressed in those April days with demonstrations and bullets, mounted ceaselessly. The most consistent communists placed themselves in the forefront of the political struggle and the fighting with arms. Outstanding among them was the 30-year-old communist, Enver Hoxha, born in the city of Gjirokastra on October 16, 1908, who led the efforts to form the Albanian Communist Party, and to organize the Anti-Fascist National Liberation War. Units, CETA, of fighters were set up, which carried out actions against the fascist troops, like that of Pisa, which during the years 1940–41, inflicted losses on the invaders. In May that year, Victor Emmanuel III, Emperor of Italy, came on a visit to Albania. In the center of Tirana the worker Vasil Lagi fired shots at him. The efforts of the most resolute communists, headed by Enver Hoxha, overcoming many difficulties, succeeded in creating the conditions for the merger of the communist groups, which were acting separately. On November 8, 1941, the representatives of the groups gathered in Tirana in the greatest secrecy and formed the Communist Party of Albania. The party took upon itself the great historic task of organizing and leading the general armed uprising against fascism for the liberation of the country and the establishment of the people's state power. The meeting elected the Provisional Central Committee. Enver Hoxha was charged with the leadership of the Central Committee. 2 weeks after the founding of the Communist Party, on November 23, 1941, and also in Tirana, the Organization of the Communist Youth of Albania was formed, with the young man, Kemal Stafa, member of the CC of the Communist Party of Albania as its political secretary. The formation of the Communist Party of Albania was accompanied with militant activities. In the cities powerful anti-fascist demonstrations broke out, which ended in bloody conflicts. The communist worker Kosi Beko was killed in the demonstration on November 8, 1941. With their exemplary bravery and courage, the communists won the sympathy of the broad masses of workers and the revolutionary patriotic youth. The fascist ruling circles in Albania understood the new situation which was being created and immediately began to take energetic measures. The quisling government of the big feudal Lord Shefkat Vërlasi, which had shown itself incapable of strangling the Albanian resistance at birth, was replaced by the government of Mustafa Kruha, an old agent of fascism, notorious for his barbarity towards the freedom fighters and the people. The ruthless measures taken by the new fascist government further aggravated the situation in the country. The Communist Party extended its armed struggle in the cities through guerrilla units, partisan and volunteer detachments were set up and the acts of sabotage and diversion became more widespread. On May 5, 1942, Kemal Stafa, political secretary of the Communist Youth Organization, was killed in battle with the fascists in Tirana. The party was shedding the blood of its finest sons and daughters for the cause of freedom. 1.5 months later, 3 communists, Perlat Rikapai, Branko Kadaya and Jordan Misgia, besieged in a house in Shkodra, fought the fascist troops with unprecedented heroism for hours on end. Armed actions were carried out everywhere. On underscore the instructions of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Albania, the guerrilla units, the partisan detachments and the volunteers from the people destroyed the telegraph and telephone line network throughout all Albania on the night of July 24 to 25, 1942. This greatly alarmed the fascists. On August 25, 1942, the first number of Zari I Populat, organ of the Albanian Communist Party, was published illegally. In September 1942, the Albanian National Liberation Conference was held at Pija, a village 18 kilometers southwest of Tirana. The Conference of Pija, which was organized on the initiative of the Albanian Communist Party, laid the basis for the union of the Albanian people in a single national liberation front. The program adopted at the Conference of Pija laid down the task of waging uncompromising war against fascism and the traitors for a free, independent, and democratic Albania. It also laid down the task of forming national liberation councils everywhere as organs of the union and mobilization of the people in the war and as organs of the people's state power. The Conference of Pija had wide repercussions. All over the country the anti-fascist movement and the war assumed a fresh impulse. From day to day the partisan units were increased and the armed struggle extended. By the end of 1942, the number of partisans reached 2,000 fighters, besides several thousand others who took part in the guerrilla units of the cities and the village detachments. Whole districts like Pija, Kavlech, Skrapar, and others had been liberated. In order to destroy the partisan forces, from September to December 1942, the occupiers, using big forces, carried out punitive operations in 27 districts of Albania, burning whole villages and massacring the population. The foreign occupationists and the local reactionaries accompanied these military operations with political activities, especially by setting up collaborationist organizations like that called Bali Komitar. The Communist Party acted with great maturity towards this organization, which at first included elements misled by enemy propaganda, exposing the real aims of this organization and enlightening those who had been deceived. Later the Bali Komitar was obliged to come out in its true colors and was abandoned by the rank-and-file people who had been misled by the pseudo-nationalist demagoguery of its leaders. The successes which the National Liberation Movement scored in 1942, made it possible, in the spring of 1943, to place on the agenda the organization of the general armed uprising against the invaders. This task was concretized at the First National Conference of the Albanian Communist Party, which was held at Labano in the Elbasan district from March 17 to 22, 1943. Meanwhile, under the new conditions of the situation, the fascist circles tried, at the beginning of 1943, to take certain new political measures in order to stop things developing to their disadvantage. The government of Mustafa Kruha was replaced by several other governments one after the other. Rome promised to make some changes in its economic policy towards Albania. Francesco Lacomani, who had been at the head of the Italian diplomacy in Albania before the occupation, was removed from his post as viceroy. The Albanian Fascist Party was replaced by a similar organization under a new label. The good work done by the National Liberation Front under the guidance of the Albanian Communist Party brought about a big increase in the number of partisan units and battalions during spring in 1943. Now the actions carried out were no longer isolated ones against fascist troops where they were stationed or in transit, but actions skillfully coordinated by the CC of the Albanian Communist Party and underscore the regional party committees. Such were a number of operations carried out from the end of June to the end of July 1943. While the General Staff of the National Liberation Army with the Secretary General of the Central Committee of the Albanian Communist Party, Enver Hoxha as its commissar, was set up at Labano, near Elbasa a number of operations against the fascist troops were taking place at Karibo Pass, on the Tirana-Elbasan Highway, at Pajajska Pogradek, at Lskovic, at Kugar of Permit, up to Mezgoran and Kikoka Pass near the town of Telalina. At the same time, the Italian fascists carried out operations against the population in the districts of Pija, Malakastra, etc. The creation of the General Staff made it possible to concentrate the military, strategic, and operational leadership of the National Liberation Army in one supreme organ. At the time when the General Staff was set up, the National Liberation Army included in its ranks 10,000 fighters organized in regular partisan units. A few days prior to the formation of the General Staff, the partisan units launched their first attack on German troops, on a motorized column which came from Macedonia and entered Albanian territory on its way to Ioannina, Greece. The attack was launched on July 6, 1943 at the village of Barmash in the Kolangia district. Taken by surprise, the Nazis suffered heavy losses in men and military equipment. In reprisal they burned the entire village of Borova and killed all the inhabitants they managed to capture, 107 men, women, and children. The setting up of the general staff, the rapid increase of partisan formation, battalions, and groups, the preparations for the formation of the 1st Shock Brigade, which was formed on August 15, 1943, all greatly alarmed the Italian command in Albania. It decided to take new measures in order to destroy the National Liberation Army. 4 divisions, reinforced by artillery troops and supported by aircraft, began a new operation in the Malacastra zone and later in other zones. The local situation was complicated also because at this time the Allied troops landed in Sicily. The Bali Comitar, which now saw that fascist Italy was on the eve of total defeat in expectation of an Allied landing on the Albanian coast, hastened to launch open attacks against the partisan forces. In collaboration with the Italian army, Italy's capitulation on September 8, 1943 created an entirely new situation in the country. On instructions from the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Albania and the General Staff of the National Liberation Army, the partisan units called on the Italian troops to stop their military operations and join the partisans in order to fight the German Nazis who were hurriedly taking the place of the Italians. The Italian command refused, and most of the Italian troops surrendered to the Germans. A number of armymen were dispersed and found shelter among Albanian peasant families, who displayed a fine spirit of magnanimity to the defeated enemy. The people shared their meager food with these former soldiers. A small number of Italians joined the Albanian partisans and later formed a partisan detachment of their own, which took the name of Antonio Gramsci. The Nazi troops, who came to Albania, encountered armed resistance from the forces of the National Liberation Army everywhere. The heaviest fighting took place in the vicinity of Vlora and extended over more than 20 days. Under conditions of relentless war with the partisan forces, the Nazis tried to stabilize the situation in Albania. They very quickly came to terms with the Bali Comitar and all the reactionaries. In the early months of the occupation, they tried demagogy to create the impression that they supported the initiative of the nationalists, implying the collaborationists, for the creation of an independent Albanian state. At the same time, another organization was set up, instigated in particular by the Anglo-Americans, which had the aim of rallying the former sympathizers of King Zog. This organization is known as Legality. By mid-October 1943, the partisan units had liberated whole districts, and even a certain number of towns, while Tirana itself was surrounded by the partisan forces. On October 18, on the eve of the opening of the so-called Constituent Assembly, under the protection of German bayonets, the partisan artillery of the 3rd Shock Brigade shelled the palace where the meeting of the traitors was to be held. It was clear to the Germans that the partisan forces were so strong that, in order to cope with them, it was necessary to engage in major military operations themselves. For this purpose, parallel with demagogic measures, the German command quickly prepared a large-scale military operation which is known in the history of the National Liberation War as the Winter Campaign of 1943-44. In this campaign, which started in October 1943 and ended in February 1944, 4 Hitlerite divisions were engaged as well as a large number of collaborationist troops from the Quisling government, Bali Comitar, Legality, etc. These troops numbered 45,000 men against 10,000 partisans included in the units of the National Liberation Army. The enemy tried to liquidate the partisan units, to destroy their bases in the countryside, to liquidate the leadership of the National Liberation Movement, the Central Committee of the Albanian Communist Party and the General Staff. The partisans and the people as a whole demonstrated unprecedented heroism at this stage of the war. The march of part of the 1st Brigade in February and March 1944, which penetrated deep to the rear of the enemy from southern Albania to regions of central Albania, has become a legend. The Winter Campaign was a total failure for the Germans and their collaborators. Although it had to pass through very difficult situations, although it lost about 1,000 partisans killed, or dead from the difficult conditions of the winter, the National Liberation Army emerged stronger than ever. Instead of the 3 brigades which it had in autumn 1943, it now had 7 brigades of partisans in action. The National Liberation Army launched a counter-offensive, and in a very short time liberated all the districts which the enemy had moved into during the operation. The victories scored by the National Liberation Army in spring 1944, enabled the Albanian Communist Party to take new political initiatives of decisive importance for the future of the country. In the conditions when the Red Army under J.V. Stalin was striking crushing blows at Hitler's army in the east and when the Allied armies were fighting in Italy, major problems arose for our country. The reactionaries, in contact with the reactionaries abroad, tried to maneuver so that they, with the aid of the Anglo-Americans, would take power into their hands once the Germans had been defeated. In these conditions, preparations were made for calling the first anti-fascist National Liberation Congress, which met in the liberated town of Permit on May 24, 1944. The Congress took decisions of extreme importance for the future of Albania. It solved the problem of political power in favor of the insurgent people, and founded the first Albanian state of people's democracy. The decisions of the Congress formed the basis of the Constitution of the People's Republic of Albania. Before the proceedings of the Congress ended, the National Liberation Army had received orders to launch the general offensive for the complete liberation of Albania. The first division of the National Liberation Army was created and set out for action in central and northern Albania in order to strengthen the movement even in those regions where the reactionaries had dug themselves in. In this undertaking, the command of the National Liberation Army encountered the opposition of the Anglo-American Mediterranean Command, which aimed at preserving the positions of the reactionaries in Albania. But those plans came to naught. After successfully coping with a new enemy operation, the German operation of June 1944, involving 50,000 enemy troops, 4.5 German divisions and some thousands of collaborationists, the National Liberation Army liberated the districts of central Albania, Dibra, Merdita, and the north. Autumn 1944 also saw the liberation, one after another, of the cities of Albania. On October 22, 1944, at its second meeting, held in the liberated city of Berat, the FNLC decided to change the Anti-Fascist Committee into the Democratic Government of Albania. The forces of the National Liberation Army fought an heroic battle lasting 19 days against some thousands of Hitlerite troops for the liberation of the capital, Tirana. Tirana was liberated on November 17, 1944. The democratic government entered Tirana on November 28, 1944. The next day, the partisan brigades also liberated Shkodra, the last city held by the Germans. That day marked the complete liberation of Albania. On orders from the Commander-in-Chief of the National Liberation Army, Enver Hoxha, and in the spirit of proletarian internationalism, 2 divisions of the National Liberation Army crossed the borders of Albania to Yugoslavia, where they took part in the fighting for the liberation of Macedonia, Kosovo and Montenegro up to southern Bosnia. Thus, even outside Albania, hundreds of sons and daughters of our people gave their life's blood for the great cause of the peoples, the victory over fascism. In this way, the Albanian people, led by the Communist Party of Albania, scored the most brilliant victory in their history. They took political power into their own hands, opening the way for the triumph of the revolution and socialist construction in Albania. Although Albania then had a population of only 1 million, it made a valuable contribution to the cause to defeat fascism. It pinned down 15 Italian and German divisions, putting out of action 70,000 enemies killed, wounded, and taken prisoner. 700,000 fascist troops trampled the 28,000 square kilometers which is the total area of Albania. For every square kilometer one freedom fighter gave his life. Whole districts and cities were razed to the ground. The economy of the country was totally devastated. On the eve of liberation, the Albanian National Liberation Army had in its ranks 70,000 partisans incorporated in 3 army corps, 6 divisions. The great victories of the National Liberation War became the basis of the post-liberation victories. Always under the leadership of the Communist Party, now Party of Labour, of Albania, Albania is marching with sure steps towards the complete construction of socialism. 3. Population, state organization, administrative division. Population. Albania has about 2,430,000 inhabitants, census of 1975. This population is more than double that of 1938. At present the number of births is 30.6 per thousand and that of deaths 7.2 per thousand. Males make up about 51.5% of the population. The density of population is 84 persons per square kilometer. American Samoa against 39 in 1945. The greatest density of population is to be found in the western part of the territory. Our policy of socialist industrialization and the harmonious development of the districts has brought about a large increase of population in certain districts which used to be less densely populated. For instance, the Mizgja zone, which used to be very backward, has now become one of the most densely populated, with over 100 inhabitants per square kilometer, because of the land improvement schemes carried out and the creation of important industrial centers during the years of our people's state power. As a result of the concern for the health and well-being of the people, the average lifespan has reached 68 years as against 38 in 1938. A characteristic of the period of our people's state power is increase of the number of workers, and especially the increase of the participation of women in production. At present, women make up 47% of the total number of workers and employees. The class structure of socialist society in Albania is characterized by the existence of two friendly classes, namely the working class and the cooperative peasantry, as well as the stratum of the people's intelligentsia. The working class is the leading class. Its proportion in our population has constantly increased as a result of the socialist industrialization of our country. The working peasantry has turned into a cooperative peasantry. For several years now, socialist relations of production have been fully established in agriculture. The stratum of intellectuals has also undergone major qualitative changes during the period of our people's state power. Under the care of the Party of Labor of Albania, a new people's intelligentsia, originating mainly from the working class and the working peasantry, has been created. In 1975, the urban population made up 34.4% of the population of the country, as against 15.4% in 1938. The number of towns now is nearly threefold that of 1945. The old towns are being reconstructed, too, with wide, asphalt streets, multi-storied modern buildings, cultural and sports institutions, parks, and gardens. The most important cities are Tirana, 192,000 inhabitants, the capital and leading industrial and cultural center of the country; Shkodra, 62,400, Durrës, 60,000, Vlora, 55,500, Elbasan, 53,300, Korea, 52,000, Berat, 30,000, Fir, 28,000. Gjirokastra, 22,000, and Lushnja, 21,000. State organization: Albania is a People's Socialist Republic. The People's Socialist Republic of Albania is the state of the dictatorship of the proletariat, which expresses and defends the interests of all the workers. The People's Socialist Republic of Albania is based on the unity of the people and has at its roots the alliance of the working class with the cooperative peasantry under the leadership of the working class. The Party of Labor of Albania, the vanguard of the working class, is the sole political leading force of the state and society. Marxism-Leninism is the dominant ideology. On the basis of its principles, the entire socialist social order is run. The People's Socialist Republic of Albania uninterruptedly carries forward the revolution adhering to class struggle, and it has the aim of ensuring the final triumph of the socialist road over the capitalist road and achieving the complete construction of socialism and communism. In the People's Socialist Republic of Albania, the entire state power emanates from and belongs to the people. The working class, the cooperative peasantry and other workers exercise their power through their representative organs and directly. The representative workers are elected by the people by general, equal, direct, and secret ballot. The electors have the right to recall their representative at any time when he has lost the political trust of the masses, or when he fails to fulfill the tasks assigned to him, or when he acts contrary to the law. The working class, as the leading class of our society, as well as the masses of the other workers, exercise direct organized control over the activity of the state organs, of the economic and social organizations and their workers, in order to defend the achievement of the revolution and to consolidate the socialist order. Citizens 18 years and over are entitled to elect and to be elected to the organs of the state power. The only people who do not have the right to vote are those who have been exempted from this right by the verdict of the court, as well as those who are mentally handicapped, proclaimed such by the court. The representative organs are of the greatest importance in the system of state organs. These organs, consisting of the People's Assembly at the center and the People's Councils at the base, are the only organs which realize the state power in the country. They make up the whole foundations of the state apparatus. All the other state organs depend upon and render account to them. The representative organs are real work institutions and at the same time, executive. Just as Marx and Lenin instructed on the representative institutions, which the proletariat sets up when it becomes the ruling class, the representative institutions in Albania are made up of people who themselves work, carry out their own decisions, supervise what is carried out, and render direct account to their electors. The highest representative organ of our country is the People's Assembly, which bears the sovereignty of the nation and of the state, and exercises all the sovereign rights on the basis of the Constitution. Representatives to the People's Assembly are elected every 4 years and carry out their activity in sessions. During the time when the People's Assembly is not in session, the high state functions are exercised in its name by the Presidium of the People's Assembly within the limits of the competences left to it by the Constitution. The Presidium of the People's Assembly is also the leading collegial organ of the state. The Presidium is the organ of the People's Assembly itself, elected by the latter and renders account to it for all its activity. Part of the representative organs are also the People's Councils, which exercise their functions as organs of state power in their respective territorial administrative units. The People's Councils are elected every 3 years and enjoy important competences in all matters of socialist construction within the units where they exercise their activity. The administrative functions are a special form of our state activity. The Council of Ministers is the highest organ of our administration, whereas at the base this function is fulfilled by the executive committees of the People's Councils. These organs are elected by the representative organs and render account to them, the Council of Ministers by the People's Assembly and the executive committees by the People's Councils. The People's Courts engage in meting out justice. Through their activity, they exert a major educational influence not only on the persons brought before court but also on all others. Finally, the organs of the Attorney General are the fourth kind of our state organs. They handle the supervision on the accurate implementation of the law by everyone, by the state organs, social organs, or citizens. But, although each of these state organs has its own characteristics and, on this basis, the corresponding competences, it is important to mention that all these organs are in close connection and permanent collaboration among them. Administrative division. The People's Socialist Republic of Albania is divided into 26 administrative districts. The main districts from the point of view of their economic and cultural development are, the district of Tirana, which provides 1/5 of the total industrial output of the Republic. All of the branches of Albanian industry, especially the engineering, textile, building materials, chemical, and food processing industries have been developed in Tirana. Tirana is also the greatest cultural center, about 1/8 of the entire population of the country live in the city. The district of Durrës is the second in the Republic from the point of view of economic development. It provides more than 1/10 of the industrial output of the Republic and is most noted for its engineering, chemical, light and food processing industries. Durrës is the principal seaport of the country. The district of Shkodra stands out, among other things, for the production of copper wire and electric cables, electric power production, food processing industry and, especially, for tobacco processing. The district of Elbasan has now become one of the most important in the country with the setting up of the metallurgical and other branches of industry. The district of Fir has undergone strikingly rapid industrial development. From a completely agricultural district, nowadays it is known for its electrical, oil and chemical fertilizer industries. Fir is an entirely new city. Profound transformations have been made in agriculture in this district. The former swamps and marshes have been completely drained and agricultural output has increased many times over in comparison with the past. The district of Korga occupies an important place in the Republic for both industrial and agricultural production. This district stands out for the precision instruments industry, the sugar, knitwear, carpet, footwear, and other industries. It is a very highly developed agricultural district. The district of Vlora is represented by the cement, mineral, electric lamp, chemical and food processing industries. The port of Vlora is the second port after that of Durrës. There are big olive and citrus fruit plantations. In the district of Berat an important place is occupied by the textile, mining, and food processing industries. Berat is an ancient city with extremely picturesque architecture and great tourist value. The district of Kruha used to have no industry while at present it is the principal producer of cement and superphosphate fertilizer. At the same time it is a prosperous agricultural center. In history it figures as the capital at the EE of Skanderbeg. The castle and museum dedicated to that time are of special interest to the visitors. The district of Gjirokastra is represented mainly by the Lagpi food processing and engineering industries. The EE8 i.e. Gjirokastra occupies a special place for its architecture. It is around a well-preserved castle and is truly a museum in direction. The National Museum of Arms is in the city. The district of Lushnja was an entirely backward arealist district. Now, as a result of large-scale reclamation work, it plus been transformed into a main producer of food grain and industrial crops. The district of Saranda on the Ionian seacoast stands CAE the rapid development of citrus orchards and its bountiful PIEA. Before liberation the district of Merdita was considered most backward one of the country, whereas now it is the Dupat district for mining and processing copper. The center of Sent district represents quite a new town. The AE of Puka stands out for its timber and minerals. The district of Kuk stands out for its mineral AES, especially for mining and treating copper ore. The Center Zero district is an entirely new city which keeps growing in size. Before the establishment of our people's state power, our districts were particularly backward economically. No industry at all, while their agriculture was AAA backward. In the years of our people's state power, the IC regions of the country have been developed in a proportional manner, and now these zones are all flourishing. This strikes one's eyes in the districts of Puka, Mati, Gramshi, Dibra, Pogradek, Kruha, Kuks, Skrapar and others. In these districts, too, alongside the all-round development of agriculture, important industria branches have been and are being set up, such as the mining, electric power, engineering, cement, and other AST, besides the factories to process agricultural and dairy products.